Hi, everybody. Welcome to the WVHuddle.com Prep Football Podcast. I am Tom Bragg, joined as always by Gazette Mail Assistant Sports Editor Derek Taylor. Just the two of us today here at 218 Capitol Street at Adelphia Sports Bar and Grill. Man, I might get a nap before we get into this. we each had burgers before that we went on here, and they were really, really good.
I had the
prime rib?
The prime rib burger.
I had the Spiros prime rib burger. It had feta cheese and stuff on it, so...
See, I'm kind of like a barbarian. I went with ketchup and mustard and bacon on mine.
I might really... That
on prime rib.
That might be a real thing, so I apologize if I nod off in the middle of this. But anyway, just the two of us today, Rick Ryan and Ryan Pritt, who I worried I was going to mess their names up because they're so similar, even though I know the guys really well.
One dude.
Yeah, neither of them were able to make it today out working for us, so... You're stuck with us. Sorry about that. We'll jump right in, though. Looking at the games from last week, the big one, I think, in AAA's, the game you were at, South Charleston, Cabell Midland. Oh, you were there. I was at Capital Hurricane for a while, and we'll get into that, but we'll just let you go on South Charleston and Cabell Midland. Seemed like a really good game.
One of the better games, especially regular season games that I've covered in a while. 33-29 was the final. Came down to the next to last play of the game. South Charleston had a 4th and 5 at, I believe, Cabell Midland's 10, and C.J. Perkins got stopped for no gain on that. Mm-hmm. Tyler Brown, Cabell Midland's quarterback, just took a knee, and that was it.
Were you a little surprised to see South Charleston, known so much for their passing attack, go on the ground on a 4th down like that?
I was, and I think that really showed ignorant sports fan in me versus the knowledgeable player and coach, because immediately I talked to Caperton Humphrey afterward, and he said, no, I saw it coming the whole time because they had thrown the ball twice to incompletions inside the 10 right before that, and basically the gist of what he was saying was, look, they were in the red zone. You don't have as much room to operate. They had tried twice, wasn't working, and so they expected a run, and they sniffed it out quick.
Now, I don't know, how can we put this? Does the win tell you more about Cabell Midland, or the loss tell you more about South Charleston? Because that was a South Charleston team that's just been decimated by injury. I mean, they're playing freshmen. I mean, yeah, they've still got Kentre Greer, the 4-year starter at quarterback. Still got C.J. Perkins, a senior leader, maybe the heart of that team. But, Fred Crozier's down, Malik Body's down. It seems like everywhere you look along that South Charleston starting lineup from week 1, there's guys that are having to fill in, sophomores, freshmen, and they played them so close. I was a little surprised by that.
I
All
was
things
too.
considered.
Oh,
yeah.
I was too. I think that is the lasting storyline coming out of that, and most of the talk after that game, even from Midland fans that I'm familiar with, have been, look, South Charleston, I mean, that was a statement game for them, and to keep it that close and to have a chance when they were leading with 2.5 minutes left in the game, all right, until Brown scored the ultimately the winning touchdown. But I've even said myself that after watching that, and that was the first time I've seen Midland play this year, I think Midland's every bit as good as it was in 2012 when it made it to the Super 6. That said, I think that was a statement game for South Charleston. I don't think that, this is a team that is, on its way down or anything like that. I think they're beat up. I think I know they've got a week off this week before they go to Ripley on October 9th. The second half of their schedule is much... I think it's significantly better for them, to pick up some wins. I think that they're going to be one of those playoff teams that, is going to get in the playoffs, like I just said, or otherwise it's not a playoff team. And it's going to be a headache for one of the higher seeds.
The game I was at, Capital Hurricane, seems like with this Capital team this year, really since that week 1 blowout against Riverside, we've kind of just been waiting for Capital to sort of do the Capital thing. Blow somebody out of the water, just dominate on both sides of the ball. And first half against Hurricane, they had a dogfight on their hands. It was 14-14 at halftime. I was down on the sideline, and the Capital was in control of the game, but Hurricane wasn't going away. Now, in the second half, it was a bit of a different story. That was the Capital that we saw some of last year, and in that early part of the season against Riverside, they kind of did what they wanted. They rattled off 28 quick points there in the third quarter, and ended up being a bit of, I think, it finished 49,
28.
28, 21.
Yeah.
I don't have it written down right in front of me. I probably should, but I apologize for that. But it ended up being not necessarily a lopsided win, but a comfortable win for Capital. Do you see that maybe as Capital getting back into their groove? They've got a big game with Huntington coming up this week. They were able to turn it on a little bit in that second half, like we mentioned. Tyree Pratt got going, Silas Nazario got going, that defense got going. So what are your thoughts on the Cougars right now as we're at about the halfway point of the season?
I think that third quarter outburst is what John Carpenter has come to expect. And honestly, I've talked to John throughout the course of the season. I still don't think that he's real comfortable with this team. He knows the talent is there, but there's something that just seems a little bit off, and that he's trying to nail that down. Maybe they found it there in that third quarter, but I think he wants to see it, and I'm sure Capital fans want to see it over the course of 48 minutes against a big opponent. You know, they've got that opportunity Friday, so we'll see. I doubt it's going to be a lopsided blowout. Huntington's good, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
most people are going to be watching this know what I'm talking about too.
Well, you mentioned Huntington. You know, on the other side of that, the Highlanders, one of the few undefeated teams in Class AAA. They've been playing, really good football lately, but it's still it seems like that Huntington thing that we talk about is, the defense is going to be among the best, if not the best, in the state year in, year out with Billy Seals as the coach down there. But sometimes the offense leaves a little bit to be desired. Maybe they have trouble moving the ball consistently. Is this something you see being a problem for Huntington going into this Capital game?
I think absolutely it's a problem. In the last couple of years we've had at least we've always had the knowledge that Huntington's defense is going to carry it, but we've also always had a couple guys on offense. Look out for Nick Tubbs. Clark Wilson can steady the ship and everything. We don't really. I mean, Deion Jackson, is that guy, but it's still not over the top. He's really not a focal point that everybody. He's not known for it yet, okay? He hasn't done it in a game, I think, that everybody in this area said maybe that. So that's just their opportunity for that to happen. Yeah. I mean, Ryan Gatrell had 2 blocked punts against Riverside last week and almost a third. I mean, he's still, I think, the star of that team. Yeah. And let's wait for them off.
Yeah, Huntington has been able to put up some points. I don't want to make it sound like Huntington can't score, but they've also done it against, and no offense to these teams, but Winfield and Riverside, not exactly teams known for shutting anybody down, let alone one of the better teams in the state. Sticking with AAA, we'll hit one real quick, and then I'll just get your thoughts on the rest of what happened last week. The big upset, Brook over Wheeling Park. Wheeling Park was the number 2 team in the Gazette Mail poll last week. They're coming to Kanawha County this week to play St. Albans, and we'll certainly touch on that because I've got some thoughts on the Panhandle teams coming to town.
Right.
They're positive, don't worry. But that kind of throws things, that middle of the pack, kind of into a loop, because all of a sudden Wheeling Park kind of falls down into it, and Brook's in the conversation now. They had that close win where they hung on against Hurricane the week before, and then they upset big rival there in the Panhandle with Wheeling Park. What's going on with these teams from the Panhandle? Where do they stand really as we're at the halfway point of the season?
There's been a little bit of talk and concern about the health of Savion Johnson.
That's Wheeling Park's running back.
Savion Johnson.
Son of Boogie Johnson, the
son of
91
Kennedy
winner.
We were talking about this last night.
How are you?
They also have a sophomore quarterback by the name of Cross Wilkinson. Okay, that Brook Wheeling Park rivalry is as important to that area and important to those schools as any rivalry down here is or across the state. And that's a big time situation. And Brook obviously is not a bad team. They're 3-2 now. They're going to be in that mix, for a playoff spot. They've got a tough second half of the schedule for them, but a lot of people do. And I wrote earlier this week, I see a lot of 6-4 teams making the playoffs, and I think Brook is going to be one of them. But you talk about the middle of the pack with Wheeling Park losing. They're 2-1-1 now, thanks to that tie at Bridgeport. I don't know if Wheeling Park is one of those 4 teams that, one of those semifinal 4 teams, okay? Will they make it to the semifinals? Could they make it to the semifinals? Absolutely. But are they a lock, to be one of those 4 teams that you consider the top 4 in the state? I'm not so sure right now. I mean, we'll, plenty of time to decide that.
Double A, single A.
Playoffs.
Anything before we move on? Double A, single A from last week.
One of the things we've been doing with the Gazette Mail poll game of the week is looking across the state for the top matchups across the state. And I was looking this coming week, really looking at the possibility of the game between James Monroe and Nicholas County in Summersville this week as being one of that. Clay County beat Nicholas County this week.
Overtime, right?
In overtime. Now, Clay is 3-2. Nicholas they're still in here. No, they dropped out.
Yeah, I think that was their first loss.
That was their first loss. I think there's a lot of teams, Clay, Roan, that I'm sure we're going to touch on later, Braxton, Nicholas in the center of the state, that are all kind of on the same level. Are going to, I think at least two of them will probably end up in the playoffs, but we're just waiting on.
Yeah, because they're all going to play each other at some point and
Exactly.
start knocking each other off.
Yep. Yep. I think that was really the one takeaway I had from Double A last week.
All right. Well, we'll jump right into the next segment where we go through this week's Gazette Mail football poll. Week 6, unofficially the halfway point, the 11-week regular season. Everybody plays 10 games. Well, everybody is. It's designed so that everybody can
Nobody
play
can
10
play more than 10.
games.
Yeah.
But you get a week off in there, too. If you play 9, like a team like Capital this year, you get 2 weeks off.
Right.
So, knowing that, we'll get into Class AAA number 1 for the second week in a row. Cabell Midland received 9 of the 10 possible first place votes. They are 5-0, and they host Belfry, Kentucky this week. That's a good program out of Kentucky.
Yeah, they're 5-0 as well.
Yeah, they contend for state titles pretty much, very consistently in the state of Kentucky. At number 2, Capital moves back up. The beneficiaries of that Wheeling Park loss, the Cougars, 4-1. They host Huntington. We've got into that one already. Number 3, Point Pleasant. They're at Parkersburg South, and that's the game of the week this week, the Gazette Mail football poll game of the week. And we reached out on Twitter this week and had people, send us questions, concerns, comments, anything that they wanted us to get into. And one of the questions we had, if I can get it to show up here, was from at David Bailey 1400, and he asked at WV Huddle, do you think Point has a chance to beat the top teams this year when they get into the playoffs? I'm not necessarily saying that Parkersburg South is a top team, but it's one of the first really big tests in Class AAA for Point Pleasant, and I don't know how to answer David's question. I want to reserve judgment on Point until we see a little more, because they've got the Parkersburg South game. They've got this back half of the schedule, and we've seen these starts at a Point Pleasant before, since they've been in AAA especially, and
unbeaten.
Yeah, and you get into the playoffs and you run into a Wheeling Park or a Martinsburg or whoever it might be, and things fall apart for them. I'm a little more inclined to think that this Point Pleasant team is a little bit better than they have been in the last few years, but I just don't know.
Here is something I want to point out, and I almost never do this. I compile a poll every week. The Point has one first place vote.
Okay.
That first place vote comes from Martinsburg. Okay. Point was eliminated from the playoffs last week, or last year, at Martinsburg. This is a writer who saw this Point Pleasant team last year in the playoffs. He thinks they're that good.
Okay.
All right. I think that Point's schedule is conducive to actually their best players staying healthy for the playoffs. Once we get to week 8, 9, 10, I would tend to see Cody Mitchell, who was lost to a broken collarbone in the first round of the playoffs last year against Jefferson, and Grant Stafford, maybe see a little less of the field late in the regular season. I actually do, from everything I know, I think that Point is at least a top 8 playoff team, and maybe a 4 or a Super 6 team. I'm not going to go that far yet, but you're right. I mean, they're not.
It's kind of one of the things you got to
wait and see.
We do the Gridiron Gurus every week,
Yeah.
and my line for years was, I'll pick West Virginia State when they prove to me that I should pick them.
Them right.
And it seems like different class, obviously, high school and college, but it's kind of the same thing. I'll believe a little more in Point Pleasant when they show me they can do it on that level. Not to take anything away from them, they've been great, but it's just we haven't seen them do that on that stage yet.
That said, I won't be shocked at all if Point Pleasant goes to Parkersburg and puts 50 on South.
I wouldn't either. South's a good team too.
At all.
South's a good team. Garrett Gilson, great athlete, quarterback for the Patriots, but the way this Point Pleasant team's been rolling. I mean, they went over to Ohio and beat up on Gallia Academy last week, and they've just been doing that to everybody. It seems they've done that to Wayne. They've done it. They do it to everybody.
And everybody's so ready to, go, oh, Wayne's no good. They give up.
Wayne's
wait and see
good.
on that,
Yeah.
okay? Let's wait and see on that.
All right, we left off at Point Pleasant. They were number 3, received 1 first-place vote, like we said, at Parkersburg South this week. Number 4, Huntington. The Highlanders are 5-0, up 1 spot from 5 last week at Capital. Number 5, George Washington, making the big leap this week. G-Dub off this Friday, but then they host Hurricane the week after that.
Yeah.
GW is still kind of hard to figure out. Their schedule hasn't been incredibly taxing the first half, but that back half, Hurricane, Capital, South Charleston, Midland. That's we'll see what the Patriots are really made of in October.
Definitely.
But so far, so good for Steve Edwards' bunch up there. Had the player of the week last week, running back Nunu Miller, 4 touchdowns, 200-some yards. Just things have been going very well for GW so far. Best case scenario for the Patriots through the first month of the season. At number 6, Martinsburg. Bulldogs making the big leap from not rated to number 6, but that's what happens when you beat Morgantown. That was a really good game. It sounded like came right down to the wire. It always comes right down to the wire.
Blocked field goal at the gun, I think. Yeah.
Like I said, the Bulldogs were not rated last week. They host Washington in an Eastern Panhandle showdown. At number 7, Morgantown, the Mohegans, 4-1. That one loss last week against Martinsburg. They dropped 1 spot from 6. They're at Musselman.
Can I make a note right here?
Absolutely, anytime.
That Washington Martinsburg game and Morgantown going to Musselman. I saw a lot. This is Wednesday afternoon as we're filming this. Saw a lot of conversation this morning and this afternoon on Twitter about the possibility of games being moved up or back in the Eastern Panhandle this weekend due to the incoming storms and stuff. I guess some games in Virginia and Maryland right around there have already been moved up to Thursday. So if you're anywhere around there, keeping an eye on those games, keep an eye on the weather because those might be moved.
All right. So also actually tied
Rick
it.
Tamlin.
Well, you do love land. We mentioned Morgantown's at number 7. Wheeling Park tied with the Mohegans. The Patriots 2-1-1, as we mentioned. The loss to Brooke and the abandoned tied game against Bridgeport to open the season. They are at St. Albans, and I love this matchup. I know it's a product of Princeton leaving the MSAC and the team sort of scrambling, trying to fill holes in their schedule where they could, but I've been saying for years I would love to see the teams from this area go to a Wheeling Park or a Morgantown or a Martinsburg or have them come here and, for whatever reason, the coaches, the athletic directors don't want to make that trip or they don't want to drive 4 hours to potentially lose or anything like that. I'm glad this is happening. I'm excited. That's the game I'm going to go to because you don't see Wheeling Park in the Kanawha Valley outside of the playoff games. When's the last time a Wheeling Park team came to the Kanawha Valley for a game? No. Have they ever? I don't know. I mean, that would take a lot of
Riverside.
research.
They played Riverside when Leon Mitchell was there.
Okay,
that was the only time that I remember them coming down here. But you're right. I mean, and those kind of games, if I may digress for a second.
Go ahead.
Look, I mean, I think those are the things we kind of grow up as high school football fans. We want to see when we're like kids and even into high school. We want to see what these teams outside our little home area are like. And that's honestly, that was one of the things I think I benefited from like growing up in New Martinsville because Magnolia played Man in the regular season. They played Musselman in the regular season. And all these bizarre out-of-area teams that I think it piqued my interest about what was going on outside of my little cave, right? And I think
your cave in New Martinsville,
right? And I think that's what sparks interest and it forwards interest in high school sports. So it's good.
Yeah, especially a team like St. Albans. They're not going to get in the playoffs. No. St. Albans fans aren't going to get the chance to see a Wheeling Park or even like a Parkersburg South or Musselman or just whoever. So I love this matchup. Can't say it enough. Love this matchup.
It's good.
It's unfortunate that they had to come about the way they did with Princeton and all the upheaval with the MSAC, but I'm kind of glad that the end product is what it is. At number 9 in AAA, South Charleston Black Eagles also off this week like their rivals George Washington, and they are at Ripley on October 9th. It's a rough schedule for Ripley this year. At number 10, Parkersburg South, as we mentioned, they host Point Pleasant this week. Others receiving votes in Class AAA, Jefferson, Brooke, John Marshall, and Spring Valley. And before we move on to AA, we had one more question that I want to get into from Prep Football Podcast Superfan, Seagator
Ooh.
at Seagator Wade.
Oh.
Says,
Wade.
at It's Really DT and at WV Huddle. And what seems like a balanced Clash AAA, how many true contenders are there to win the title? I'll hang up and listen.
First time, long time.
Yeah. I mean, it just,
How many true contenders are there to win the AAA title?
Yeah, he mentions that it's balanced. I would say, I mean, just looking at our top 10,
Swade's got a point.
10?
Yeah, 10, yeah. Looking at this, I'd say Midland, Capital, I'll include Point. I need to see more offense out of Huntington.
Okay.
GW, Martinsburg. I'm still not sold on Morgantown. Park and SC. So 1, 2, 3, 4.
Even with all the injuries.
Yeah,
You still-
yeah. I
still
think Derek Pitts, who's out now, comes back by the end of the regular season, and I think I just gotta make it to the title. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking making it to the Super Six.
Yeah, not necessarily win it, but you
not
get to Wheeling.
necessarily winning
Okay.
it, but making it to Wheeling, and I can see 7 of those top 10 teams playing for the title.
All right, so at Seagator Wade, there's your answer. Moving on to Class AA.
Sports bar.
Number 1, Bridgeport, receiving all 10 votes for what seems like the 30th week in a row. The Indians are 4-0.
Beginning of time.
Yeah, the Indians are 4-0-1. Of course, they were number 1 last week, and they host Class AAA Elkins this week. That's a Big Ten game.
Yep.
Yeah, number 2, Bluefield. The Beavers 5-0, also undefeated. They host Richlands, Virginia. Bluefield just seems like they're getting steam every week.
Yeah.
Getting things rolling. This might be one of those Bridgeport Bluefield years. But at number 3, Kaiser, the Golden Tornado. Ken Ward, one of our news side reporters' favorite team, proud alum of the Golden Tornado. They're kind of in that Bluefield mold. It seems like every week things get a little better. Give people like me and you and
Well,
fans
the
around
resume
the
gets
state
better every week.
a little more to think about when you're thinking about the top teams
Getting a
in
little
Class
more
AA.
context.
Kaiser's 5-0 there at Hampshire this week. At number 4, Fairmont Senior, the Polar Bears, also 5-0, off this week at University, October 9th. And University, I know it's a AA, AAA matchup, but that's a game that's been played for a long, long time. I've covered that game in Morgantown and at East West Stadium, and University's down this year. I think you ask just about anybody around the state.
I think it's a trap game for Fairmont.
It very well
really
could be.
do.
They're down, but they're not that down.
Yep.
Early number 4. Number 5, Tulsa. The Rebels coming to the Kanawha Valley this week. They're at Sissonville. Get a good look at them. Number 6, Chapmanville, also 5-0. They are at Mountain View. Excuse me. Yeah, they host Mountain View. Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's interesting. We'll stop at number 6 there for a second, but Bridgeport's the only team in the top 6 with a blemish on their record. that tie.
Yeah.
But everybody else 5-0 undefeated, and none of those teams have had a week off either. So you're going to see a lot of breaks in the second half of the season for those top teams as it stands now in Class AA. At number 7, Mingo Central, the Miners, 3-1. They host Wayne. That's a pretty big game for as far as Cardinal Conference AA playoff seeding might end up shaking out. Their one loss, of course, was to Tulsa. Excuse me. At number 8, James Monroe, 4-0. Not rated last week at Nicholas County. That's a game you kind of got into a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the Mavericks. I just I've always kind of that's an out of area program that I always kind of like. Yeah, I want to know more about that. You know,
They typically cool nickname,
Maverick,
cool
yeah,
uniforms. Yeah, what's
cool nickname? I mean, their fans call them the Plowboys. I think that's awesome. You know, the 07 title game against Bluefield was one of the better ones that I've
that
covered.
game was great.
That was awesome. So a lot of respect for that program, and good to see them back in the top 10.
Left off at number 8 with James Monroe. At number 9, Robert C. Byrd, the Eagles, 3-2, up from number 10 last week. They've got the week off. They are at East Fairmont. Oh, the Bees.
The Bees.
Yeah, at East Fairmont,
Good band.
October 9th. Oh, great band. The Honeybees, good band. The Busy Bees.
Yeah.
At number 10, Weir, 4-1, at Union Local, Ohio. Others receiving votes in Class AA this week: Nicholas County, Wayne, Lincoln, Liberty from Raleigh County, Roane County, and Summers County. Moving on to Class A at number 1, kind of like in Class AA, it's been pretty consistent throughout the season. Magnolia, 10-0, received all 100 possible points. They are, I said 10-0, 10 first place votes, 5-0. getting ahead of myself here.
Not yet.
They host Monroe Central, Ohio this week. Number 2, Moorfield, also 5-0 at Berkeley Springs. Williamstown, number 3, with 1 loss on the record. They are 4-1. They're at St. Mary's, and that should be a pretty good game.
Yeah.
St. Mary's, of course, has come up short in the playoffs the last few years, but as far as consistency through the regular season goes, that's been a team that's been as good as any in Class A the last 3 or 4 years.
Jody Mote's done a great job there. It's a rematch of last year's single A title game,
Which was an awesome game.
Classic.
Awesome game. All right, so at 3 is Williamstown. At 4, man, the Hillbillies 5-0. It seemed like like we mentioned with some of those teams at the top of AA, the Hillbillies gain a little bit of steam, a little bit of momentum.
Yep.
People start taking a little more notice every week of what they're doing down there. So we'll see what happens with them. They are off this week, and then a big kind of a rivalry game with them in Chapmanville on October 9th. At number 5, as we mentioned earlier, St. Mary's. They are 4-0, and they host Williamstown. Number 6, Wheeling Central. 4-1. They host Lindsley this week, and I never know anything about Lindsley football.
Difficult to tell.
Yeah, because they're not an SSAC team. Right. They don't play for state titles in West Virginia. They kind of pick and choose who and where they play, and they never come down here. So we don't know much about Lindsley.
I haven't seen Lindsley in a long time.
Yeah, so good luck to Wheeling Central, because you'll obviously know more about them than we do at this point.
Yep.
At number 7, undefeated Buffalo at Tug Valley. The Bison.
Big game.
Yeah, that's a big game for them. The Bison have just been. We talked about this in maybe the first podcast, maybe the second one this season. How Buffalo kind of has followed the mold of how Spring Valley's gone in recent seasons. You're up 1 year, you're down the next year. You're up 1 year, you're down the next year. Well, Buffalo's seems like they've broken from that. Undefeated so far. They've got a sophomore quarterback and Ethan Burgess, who's been playing really well. He was Player of the Week 2 weeks ago for the Huddle, and things just seem to be going the Bison's way. I feel like I'm probably going to pick Buffalo in this one over Tug Valley, but it's going to be a good game.
Absolutely. I think I'm going with Tug because of the home field, but absolutely, this is the matchup that eliminated Buffalo from the playoffs last year in the quarterfinals.
At number 8 in Class A, East Hardy, they are at Pendleton County. Tug Valley at number 9, 4-1, as we mentioned, they host Buffalo. And at number 10, making their debut for the season, the South Harrison Hawks. They won that grudge match with Lincoln.
Yeah,
moved up into the top 10, and they host Calhoun County this week. Only one team also receiving votes in Class A, and that was Bishop Donahue. Any wrap-up thoughts on the poll this week before we get into the next segment?
It seems like Rick talked a little bit last week about the haves and has-nots in the MSAC. When only 11 teams are getting votes in the entire state, I think we're pretty much settled on who the haves in single A are. There's not a lot of debate. These are basically teams, and if anybody comes out of there to make the top 8, it'll be a big surprise. I think we're pretty solid. These are the best teams in single A.
Oh, it might be nap time soon, man. That burger is still, it's so good. So good. Again, as always, we're glad to be down here at 218 Capitol Street, Adelphia Sports Bar and Grill. This is the first time you and I have just been on our own down here.
Yeah.
We've, as we mentioned before, done the Skype basement podcast. We've recorded over at the newspaper office. And
my aluminum foil hat.
Yeah, kind of segueing into that, something you and I have done in the past couple seasons. This is the 3rd season we've done this. About this time each year, the conversation for the Kennedy Award starts to ramp up, and we find ourselves not necessarily bombarded, but you get a lot of questions of, why isn't this kid getting any recognition? This kid should be a definite contender for the Kennedy Award. And it's just kind of too early to tell. We're right on that cusp of where people start to really emerge, but I don't want to call it politics, but there's a method of how the Kennedy Award is selected and how people start sort of paring down where the votes are going to come from.
Right.
And I'll just let you explain it, because you've been voting for the Kennedy Award for a lot longer than I have, and you know a lot more about it. What started this all is we were having a conversation in the newsroom yesterday about Tyler May from Roane County. If you've been paying attention, the Roane County quarterback has been rattling off just boatloads of yards, 4 and 5 touchdowns a week, it seems like. And I asked you, can Tyler May win the Kennedy Award? And you kind of hesitated because of all that goes into how a player gets elected to win that award. So I'll just leave it there and let you go.
Okay, cool. Start off with Tyler May has 1,250 rushing yards and 23 touchdowns through 5 games, okay? And Roane County is 4-1. It's a ridiculous amount, and ridiculously impressive amount. But we talk about electability a lot when we get into explaining how people win the Kennedy Award. And look, it really helps if you understand the Electoral College. To tell you the truth, that it really helps. Understand that so many votes come from different areas of the state. You know, the major daily newspapers. You know, all
who gets the
the
votes?
writers.
Yeah.
Are members of the West Virginia Sports Writers Association, and we all get one vote apiece. And
You vote top three.
you vote top three. There's 3 points for first place vote, 2 points for second, 1 for a third. And you got to fill out the entire ballot or it doesn't count. Blah, 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 blah. Read the fine print. But
Yeah, Doug Huff will let you know.
yeah, as well as the entire history of the Kennedy Award. So you've got Wheeling, Parkersburg, Morgantown, Fairmont, Clarksburg, Martinsburg, Charleston, Huntington, Bluefield, Beckley, basically. Okay, and you know there's some smaller daily papers that have like 1 or 2 man staffs, but those are where the votes come from. And usually, almost always, the winner comes from one of those areas. And unfortunately for Tyler May, he's kind of in between several of them. Roane County is about an hour from here. Spencer is. You know, it's Roane County plays in the Little Kanawha Conference, which really is a Parkersburg newspaper, you know, conference. They
cover a lot of the teams that are playing the LKC.
But they're so far from Parkersburg that they don't see them on a weekly basis, so he's not getting print every week, like live coverage of, you know, what he's doing from week to week. So he's not in the public conscience as much as players in Charleston, Huntington, etc. are. The other thing that I've always banged the drum on was team success. And the only time that I think in the last 20 years...
You can say there's something to this.
Maybe more. Actually, it's the only time since 1989. I remember that because it was David Mayfield, I believe his name was. Correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to tweet at me or whatever. But Morgantown in 1989 won the Kennedy, and he was the last one until Will Cole from Bluefield in 2008 to win the Kennedy without making the semifinals with his team. Okay, so making the semis is a big time because by that time nobody is really seeing anybody else except for those 12 teams that are left.
And there's no secrets at that point. You're on the big stage.
Exactly.
Everybody's paying attention when there's 4 games in the state versus 100 games.
Exactly. So, is Tyler May one of the best players in the state, or versus can he be elected to the Kennedy? And I said before we started filming, right now I see 3 teams in AA that I would think are almost locks to make the semis, and that would be Bridgeport, Bluefield, and Kaiser. I think there's one spot for Chapmanville, Tulsa, Fairmont, and the rest of everybody to fight over.
Roane County,
and that's going to depend on where, you know, seeding and so forth. I think it's going to be extremely difficult for Tyler May to win the Kennedy Award, regardless of how many yards he piles up. But that said, I mean, if it's still at this rate and he's run for, 2,500 yards and almost 50 touchdowns into the playoffs, his candidacy becomes a lot more serious at that point. Yeah.
Okay, so we talk about the electability of guys. We get to this point in the season, and it seems like kind of an odd year because typically by this point, say last season, we were like, okay, Kayshawn Haley has separated himself and put himself on that platform as he can win it. And, in past years, we've had other guys that have stepped up earlier in the season and just kind of dominated through the first 6-8 weeks of the season. You're like, okay, that's probably going to be the guy. Let's see what everybody else has. I'm not really seeing that this year.
And I'm sitting here thinking...
There's one guy, though. I will mention one name. Cody Mitchell from Point Pleasant.
Okay, yeah.
And we've talked about point schedule and how it hasn't necessarily been extremely difficult. They did have that game at Wayne, but Wayne's down a little bit, but they're not that down, but they just did what they wanted with him.
Right.
But Cody Mitchell has been the name every week for a legitimate semifinal contender in any class that has just pounded people. Outside of him, though, I don't know. I just don't know. You've got the Tyree Pratts and the Kentrey Greers, but just the numbers just don't seem like they're there for those guys
Right.
through
Yeah.
the end of September.
It's a very good point. And I think I was just talking about, for the sake of this argument, whatever, we'll call them the metro areas, okay? The metro areas don't have one of those guys this year. That benefits a guy like Tyler May, and it definitely benefits a guy like Cody Mitchell. Because there's not... Okay, Tyree Pratt and Kentrey Greer. Let's look at them right off the bat, because those are the two guys from this metro area that came into the season, let's face it, on this board, right?
Yeah.
They're doing well, but they're not lighting it up. I mean, they're not putting
they're
up,
not having, like,
you know,
500
video
yard
game
games,
numbers,
yeah.
right? But I would say May, Presley at Tulsa,
Okay.
Dylan Tonkery at Bridgeport, Stapleton at Cabell Midland.
Okay, yeah.
has been putting up real good numbers, but he's also playing off Caperton Humphrey. And
Yeah, I wondered about that with Cabell Midland. It seems like if this was going to be a year, a kid from Cabell Midland could get into the Kennedy conversation, it might be it, but there's so many good players and not necessarily one that's great. And if there is, you don't know because everybody does so much for them. There's not,
Right.
They don't really lean on one guy.
right. Well,
Yeah.
and I think that's what hurt David Gaddis a couple years ago. You know,
Oh, he was great. His senior year at Cabell Midland, when they went to the title game, he had a fantastic year, but there were several guys. I mean, he wasn't the only one that had a great year for them.
Right. And, you know, Mitchell, Pratt, Barry at Chapmanville, the quarterback, and Christian Johnson at Jefferson.
Yeah.
I think all these guys are in the mix. Honestly, right now, as we head officially into the second half of the regular season, I would say Cody Mitchell's right now the number one guy. I'll say it right now. Cody Mitchell right now I'd have number one. There.
Me too. Oh, as we giggle through our segue here, almost time to wrap it up. Again, here at 218 Capitol Street, Adelphia Sports Bar and Grill. I think the burger thing's died down a little bit. I might be able to hold off on the nap, but I also might get something to go because it's so delicious when we leave here. Yeah, I think they do happy hour from 4:30 to 7:30 every night. They've got the kitchen open late night, any sort of sports. They've got every NFL game. You can kind of see, and there's TV.
Yeah, I'm
TV,
going back and forth between soccer and honestly CNN and NFL right here. So
Yeah, if
I'm
you've been
happy.
wondering why I've been looking off camera, there's lots of stimulation and shiny, shaky things over there. But great place down here. Again, just it's so cool to have a home to do this in and not be in like a closet at the newspaper office. So just all the thanks in the world to the folks down in Adelphia for having us down here each week.
Definitely. Honestly, I mean, regardless of what, I've always been one of those dudes that like sitting in a restaurant and just watching the world go by, and I like seeing the traffic and the crowd and everything outside.
Yeah, what you guys can't see is there's a big window
right
behind
but that's
where the
really
camera
cool to
is.
me
So.
because I'm just like staring all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, if I was making any funny faces, it was making them back at somebody.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that about does it. You got any final thoughts this week? We've kind of touched on a little bit of everything. With the condensed crew here, we had a little more to just get into ourselves. So I
Right.
didn't really have a big point at the end.
It's
It
like a
probably would have been
reunion.
something about the Wheeling Park teams coming down, and I'll just reiterate that it is great to see teams from outside the Kanawha Valley, from those metro areas you
Right.
talked about that you hear about. You hear about Wheeling Park, you hear about Morgantown, you hear about Martinsburg, you hear about Parkersburg South or Parkersburg, and they're MSAC Parkersburg, so you see them a little more. But the other teams, though, you never see them. Musselman, Jefferson, they don't come down here. The teams from our area don't go up there. So again, just to reiterate, great to see that matchup, however it came about.
Definitely. I think I'm going to jump off from my column earlier this week, and in case you hadn't picked up the Gazette Mail earlier this week, I looked at the likelihood of a lot, and I mentioned it earlier today, of a lot of 6-4 teams in AAA making the playoffs. And
That's always kind of been the benchmark too. I remember being in high school, and the coaches were like, "All right, you got to get to 6-4 to even get considered."
And
But
normally
it
there's
doesn't
2 or
happen
3.
every year, though.
Yeah, normally there's about 2 or 3. We're looking at the possibility of 6 and 7 of them making it. I mean, which
6 and 7 making it.
making it.
Wow.
Yeah. And I talked to a couple other people in the media across the state, and they're in agreement with me. I mean, there's a lot of people beating up on each other this year, and here's what it does. And I mentioned South Charleston as a possible title appearance, team. I still got South Charleston finishing at 7-3, And with
that means
many
they run,
6
that means
and
they
4
run the
teams,
table. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
With that many 6 and 4 teams, they'd still get like an 8 or 9 seed, okay? Which basically gives them a real nice. I mean, they playing a 1 or 2 in the second round. But
I mean, we saw last week,
I just saw
Cabell
them go
Midland's
toe to
won,
toe
yeah.
with Midland. You know, I think it can happen. I'm not saying it is going to happen, but what, as a result of all these 6 and 4s happening, or possibly getting in here, is I think we're going to have a wildly unpredictable playoff season in AAA.
That's
I really
fun,
do.
though.
Oh yeah.
That's great.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's great. You can follow along with all of that playoff action down the road and the road to get there at WV Huddle on Twitter. You're at It's Really DT, and that's just for our prep sports stuff. We do WVU, Marshall, MEC, State and UC. You can follow our staff account on Twitter at Gazmail Sports. I am at Tom Bragg Sports. WVHuddle.com is where all of our prep football content is. You can find this podcast there. Might be linked on Twitter, but we'd appreciate it if you went to the website too. Yeah. The Gazette Mail poll is there. We got photo galleries, recaps from all the games we cover, box scores, roundups, name it, we got it at WVHuddle.com. And I think that about does it. I'm for Tom Bragg, Derek Taylor. Thanks again for watching, guys.
See you guys.